Not often anybody claps me. I wrote this presentation, and this is a presentation that is very dear to my heart. I wrote this about 2 weeks ago, after Nigel was kind enough to invite me. Since then, one or two things have happened in my life, and have happened in the world, that may well sort of change a bit of it as I go along. I was at an event last night at the launch of a book, and they asked me to hello. It wouldn't be a lot of good if I was Sir Alex Ferguson, would it? Giving a conference, I've just bought somebody, I'm not telling you. And they said to me, what's it been like for the last 2.5 years, 21 months? And how did you feel you were treated? And so I told them this anecdote, and this is a mild anecdote, and I'll just tell you this anecdote before I do this. So when you've been on bail from the police for something as serious and as high profile as this for 21 months, you wet yourself. It's scary. You know, it affects your family, it affects your career comes to a crashing stop, etc., etc. So I was due to return my bail for about the 8th time on Friday, this Friday coming. But last Thursday night, my lawyer, at about 10 to 5, an email dropped into his inbox from the CPS. And it simply said, tomorrow morning we're going to announce a decision at 11 o'clock about the investigation into your client. What? My lawyer rings them back about 2 minutes past 5. It was shot. He rang all the police numbers we've got. Nobody answered. Now, I don't know about you, how you'd feel about this, but you tend to think that doesn't feel good, does it? You know, it doesn't send positive vibes. You'd be surprised to hear Thursday night was not a good night in the Wallis household. There was a lot of nerves going on. So my lawyer starts ringing at 9 o'clock the next morning to the CPS, to check they'd got the date right, because I was due to go in next Friday coming, you know. 10:01, someone answered the phone. And they said, no, it's correct. We are announcing the decision today at 11 o'clock, and we're going to let you know the decision at 10:30. So my lawyer says, well, look, you've had him for 21 months. Surely you can tell us now and give us heads up about what you're going to do. It's only half an hour. No, you'll have to wait until we're sending you an email. We're not going to call you. We'll send you an email at 10:30. So I had to wait from 10 o'clock until 10:31 when my lawyer rang. And my lawyer rang and said, you've been cleared. No further action. No evidence. Not insufficient evidence. That final turn of the screw, that they knew on Thursday night that they weren't going to charge me. They knew that it was over on Thursday night, but had to make me wait until 10:31 the following morning, summarises what this experience has been like. And this isn't just about me, Neil Wallis. There are 60 other journalists in this country at the moment who are either under arrest on bail, or a handful have been charged with some offences. Yesterday morning, one of those young women rang me. She's been on bail since December 2011. That's 15 months that she has been on bail. As part of what happens on bail, you're banned from talking to anybody that might be connected to you. They give you a whole list of people you're not allowed to talk to, presumably, you know, I guess, in case you get together with them to cook up your story. It's very isolating. In the last 3 days, I've had 6 or 7 different people now able to ring me, who've rung me just to hear a voice. There are more journalists on remand, on bail in this country than there are in Iran. That's the significance of the stuff I'm going to talk to you about and what is happening in the whole post-hacking era. So, that's just to give you a little bit of a prelim, if you see what I mean. It may explain some of the views that I have. It may inform. So, Leveson, the devil's in the detail. What is the Leveson debate? Lord Leveson says he wants an independent regulator backed by statutory underpinning. The opponents, me, and lots of others, not hacked off, the wholly owned subsidiary of Hugh Grant and various other sleazy characters. We reckon, I believe, passionately, that it's state regulation by another name. Do you know how long you've had a free press? 317 years. People have died to protect that free press. And the free press is the right to have somebody in the Independent yesterday ripped the pee out of me for the piece I wrote in the Mail on Sunday and described me as a Solzhenitsyn of Wapping. To be honest, it was a bit bloody cruel. A bit hurtful. I'm a sensitive soul. But that's a free press, frankly. Do you know what a free press is? A free press is what Nick Clegg was railing against this yesterday when he demanded an end to self-appointed detectives investigating the idea that for 4 years the Lib Dems have covered up the fact that one of their top bloke was touching up women PCC, political candidates. He was using his position, they allege, his authority, his power, to grope them. Nick Clegg says journalists should not be investigating this. I disagree. If Nick Clegg gets his way, he supports statutory regulation. They call it statutory underpinning. Bollocks, by the way. That's what you'll get. The word, this is from a guy called Tim Luckhurst, Professor Tim Luckhurst. To have the word statutory and independent linked in one sentence is an oxymoron. If you don't know an oxymoron like me, you can ask one of this lot. They're your bosses. So what is there? There's 1 million words in the Leveson Report, 2,000 pages, 92 recommendations, 45 don't involve regulation. Where should I be pointing this when I press it? Now, as I say, I did this before. Let's ask this question. Do you trust politicians with the free press, to control the free press? This lady's the, as you know, the Secretary for Culture and Media. Her expenses started being investigated by the Daily Telegraph. Her SPAD, Special Advisor, rang up the editor and said, do you think that's such a wise idea, considering we're considering whether or not to bring in regulation of the media? Do you think that's a good idea to investigate her expenses? Thankfully, they did. This guy's done it with shame. He's in favour of press regulation. He got sacked from the Commons. Well, he was forced to resign. He's an MP for Rotherham, or was, because of all the money he stole from you, the taxpayer, or your parents, the taxpayer. I could, of course, if I'd had time, I could have put Nick Clegg up there, couldn't I? The man who does it, what else did he say this morning? Or one of his people said this morning that the investigation into the allegation that the former chief executive of the Liberal Democrat Party molested females is, quote, an internal party matter. and is not an issue for the press. I disagree. This guy could be Chris Huhne, couldn't he? And you all know what happened to Chris Huhne. Multi-millionaire, he used his wealth for a year to put off and try to deflect and try to stop the allegation, the charge that he'd forced his wife, or he persuaded his wife to take his driving points. Eventually he gave in his money, ran out. His money didn't run out, actually, sorry. His lawyer says, end of the road, you're nailed. And he had to plead guilty after a year of denial. So our issue is this: the sort of people we're talking about? Who would create Leveson statute? Well, MPs would, wouldn't they? They'd debate it. They'd decide the wording. They'd vote to bring it in the law. The same MPs. And do you remember the MPs' expenses scandal? You're all journalism students, I assume you do. There's at least a dozen of them forced to either resign as MPs or stand down as members of the Lords. About half a dozen went to prison, right? Those same kind of MPs. A year ago, Chris Huhne, Dennis McShane could have voted on this. Do you remember Hacktoff's poster, MP poster boy, Chris Bryant? Quite a nice bloke to meet, actually. But he and the Speaker of the House of Commons is fighting desperately at the moment to stop the Daily Telegraph investigating further about the fact that he bought a flat, he rented it out to somebody, and then rented a flat of his own at your expense, at the taxpayer's expense. Doesn't think that should be investigated. Those are the people who... I'm not having a lot of success here, am I? They're the people who will decide. So, sorry, let me have another go. So why does the free press matter? The free press includes being able to write about Jordan. It includes being able to cover Big Brother, the TV programme, incidentally. Britain's Got Talent. But it also, whether you are the Guardian or the Daily Star, whether you're the FT or Sunday Sport, it also does this. It holds to account the state, the government, and the establishment. It asks the questions, it investigates the issues, exposes the truth that the establishment do not want you to know. If politicians get any role in the regulation of the press, they get the press they want, not the press they deserve. I won't tread on you, doggy. Press freedom isn't any of these things, self-evidently. It cannot be any of these things. And it must not. And now I'm in a more privileged position of having been cleared by the police. I can say it even more forthrightly. And that's the last one there in particular is really significant. You have 60 journalists under arrest or facing charges in this country because of laws. Why do you need Leveson? Why do you need more regulation? People, I was at a do last night with one of the vicar of Hacktoff, a guy called Evan Davis. Evan Harris. He really is like a vicar. He talks in a sort of monotone. And he reads things. And he doesn't move his mouth. I don't know why a vicar's like that, but hey. The problem is this. There are some terrible things have happened. The hacking of Millie Dowler's phone was a terrible thing and should never have happened, and it's unconscionable. But one-off incidents, the mistreatment of some of the victims of the press is not a reason, I'm afraid, to destroy press freedom for us all. Again, Tim Luckhurst, as you can gather, is a bit of a hero of mine. Free speech belongs to everybody, not just the victims. So, there's more than one Leveson law. It's not just about regulation. It's about things like this. There's 26 other legal changes that will impact journalists. Reporters could face 2 years jail. Investigations crippled. 3 impacts are particularly important. The first one is that Leveson recommends that Section 32 of the Data Protection Act should be changed to say the processing of data is necessary for publication rather than simply being in fact undertaken with a view for publication. What this means is this. Nigel here brings me a sheaf of documents that thick and says, this proves, in here is the data, he gives me 86 documents, that shows that money is being siphoned off by the journalism school. The head of the journalism school, where is she? Oh, she's run away now. She's there, it's been siphoned off for a villa in Cyprus. The issue is this. If I don't use that information, all those 86 documents, hundreds of pages, I don't know what I'm going to need until I've gone through it all. That's illegal. It's legal to use the pages that I use under Leveson, but under Leveson, it has to be necessary for publication. If you're in investigative journalism, trust me, you work forever exploring loads of things. Is it true that this lady is related to that bloke at the back there? I have to investigate that because that bloke at the back there is actually his son. If it turns out to be untrue, it wasn't necessary for publication. I'm not putting it in the paper. I've broken the law. This is a good one. It's a great one, this one. A guy called David Henke, who is the current Reporter of the Year, political journalist. He did a whole load of exposés about MPs and cash for access, essentially. What this says is, at the moment, if you're a journalist and I come to you and I say, I think you've got a story on me, I want to know everything there is that your organisation has about me. And you say, currently, sod off. I'm not telling you. It took Henke 3 years to gather all the material together till he could finally run the expose that actually made his name in The Guardian. Not anymore. If this comes through, what it means is that at any point an individual can come to your news organisation and say, I want all the information you've got on me. And you have to give it. What could that show, for instance? All the information I've got could show that she has told me something about him. He wants to know, she doesn't want him to know. What does that mean? You know what my source is. I don't know. Is that good for journalism? Is that good for investigative journalism? I don't believe it is. This is a doozy. Again, it's all in the report. You go and read this yourselves. You're all journalists, journalist students. Go and check out what I'm saying. But effectively, this is the impact of that, of that recommendation. The protection of sources, which is supposed to be the bedrock of what you do, goes. Papers must record, police can demand the names. So these are my last 3 questions. Do you trust MPs never to act in their own best interest? Chris Huhne, Dennis McShane. Do you think they would all hate to control what the press reports? Do you believe an independent body set up by MPs would never be abused by them? And if you say yes to any of them, there's a 4th. Do you still believe in Father Christmas? that's the end of that presentation. I can either talk on now, Nigel, more generally, or if you want to do Q&As, it's up to you. I don't mind either way. I can bore you to death about my career as one of the world's greatest journalists, if you like. To be honest, I've been around a bit. I started on the, we did the same way, really. We did, I started as a trainee on the Skegness Standard, Circulation 6000. You've heard of it, it's the sort of Costa Brava of Lincolnshire. From there I went to the Worksop Guardian, Circulation 16,000. That's just outside Sheffield, I don't know whether you know it. And I did what's called my indentures there, and I did a block release scheme. And I gather some of you guys may be doing the same thing here. Work on a local newspaper, then twice over the next 3 years, is it 2 years? You get sent to a journalism college for 3 months. I did that. Amazingly, I passed. I went to join the Leicester Mercury, which I hated. I hated Leicester. Lasted there 3 months. Went to the Northern Echo. Great paper. Great paper in the northeast. I've always been very fond of the northeast ever since. Manchester Evening News. At the time, it sold 300,000, was the biggest regional newspaper outside London. It's now owned by Trinity Mirror, who run it out of Oldham. The Manchester Evening News is run out of Oldham. What world are we actually in now? From there, I joined the Sunday People as a freelance. Then I joined on the Daily Star as in Manchester, all of this was, when I was I was sort of an investigator type guy there. And then I joined the Sun, and I worked my way up to eventually, worked my way up to be the head of features. I became the head of news. I effectively became the head of content. I became the deputy editor. I was then poached to become the editor of the People. I was there for 5 years, and then I went back to the News of the World, where I became the deputy editor because I didn't like the people who owned Trinity Mirror, and I thought they were running it into the ground. I left, so I was editor there, deputy editor to Andy Coulson, who, as you know, is still under arrest and has been charged, and is in court next Friday for a remand hearing with some others. Rebecca Brooks was the editor of The Sun. When Andy left, he resigned after the conviction of Goodman and Mulcair in 2007, January 2007. A new editor came in. I ended up being the executive editor. And I decided, I'm now 62, as I was coming to the end of my 50s, I thought, I want to try something else now, and I went out into PR, and I ran a PR company for a while, until Mr. Plod, 6 of them, came and rang the doorbell, knocked on the door at 6 a.m. on the 14th of July, 2011, and trust me, I'm never going to forget that date. My poor old missus holds herself out of bed because I needed to hit the phone to ring a lawyer. It was 5 or 6 days, I think, after The Guardian ran their untrue story about that Millie Dowler's voicemails had been deleted. I believe I was a trophy arrest, I think, because of the zeitgeist at the time, because of the political atmosphere at the time. I don't know whether you remember, but there was select committee hearings going on. There was no bigger story. It was wall to wall, whether on TV or newspapers, about the phone hacking and so on and so forth. And I believe that I was a trophy. They wanted to be seen to be doing something, and frankly, they believed it. I think they believed that if they nicked me, they would find something. They kept going for 21 months and eventually gave up, which in a way shows the system works, I guess. They eventually said, never said sorry, nothing like that. I am very active on Twitter. I started it about 6 months ago after I got fed up with just being treated like an object they could play with. And so I thought, I'll go on Twitter and I'll start talking about this stuff. Nobody's talking about it. They're all getting it all their own way. All this hacked off stuff. I gave evidence in person twice at Leveson. I was asked to give written evidence a third time. So I decided to talk about it. And that's what I'm doing, really. I'm trying to talk about this stuff. And I also deeply, deeply care about those other 60 journalists. As I say, more than there are in Iran, who are in the hands of the police at the moment. I fear that effectively the police in this country have become politicised. I don't mean in the sense of they vote, they do what Theresa May says, or David Cameron says, or before that in the sense of what Gordon Brown said on that particular day. I don't believe in that way. I mean politicised in the sense that they feel now they have to be part of the prevailing political atmosphere of the time. And part of that prevailing political atmosphere, that political zeitgeist, is it's time to kick lumps out of journalists and we can treat them how we like. They don't have to like us. And I hate to tell you this, they won't particularly like you either. But we do actually do a real job. And I was at this thing last night and this guy from Hacked Off was sneering at the Sun, sneering at the tabloids, saying, well, I only read it for the racing. Included the Daily Mail in that, incidentally. But the truth of the matter is this, what you need to think about in your careers, and thankfully not here, obviously, but particularly in the South, journalism colleges are all run by people who've done jobs on niche newspapers that nobody reads. You know, broadsheet journalists. I'm sure all of you, as part of what you do, read circulation figures. There's a very good website that I think is called Media Briefing that analyses circulation figures and so on and so forth. But here's some basic numbers that you need to keep in your head when you think about, because what you're going to be, you're all going to be salesmen, saleswomen, right? Because what you're going to sell is something that interests someone enough that they pick that up and choose to read it. Because journalism is about choice. People can choose to read your product or not. They can prove with the majority of national newspapers whether to buy it or not. Every single day they make that choice. And 2.4 million choose to spend 40 pence every day on the Sun. 7 million choose to read it. The circulation of the Independent is currently 58,000. I don't know, perhaps you could tell me actually, what the circulation now is of the Yorkshire Evening Post. I bet it's... Right? So the Yorkshire Post, Evening Post, sorry, sells half as many as the Independent. Less than 200,000 people a day choose to buy The Guardian. Now, people say, yeah, but look, think about the website, think about the website. And it's brilliant what the website is. And incidentally, I don't glory in any of those figures. I think it's appalling that so few newspapers are being bought in this country. But there is a truth, isn't there? That Leveson, Hacked Off, the worthy journalism colleges of the South East, all populated by broadsheets saying, that is journalism. Except every day people out there are voting with their feet, or more important, with their 50 pences not to buy it. And they want to buy something else. Now, where that'll end up, I don't know. The media briefing piece was deeply interesting because it said, in fact, the The Sun and the Mail will last much longer, in terms of if you look at their exponential curves, than any of the broadsheets. I think that's sad for the broadsheets, but please don't be fooled and think that the tabloids are just going to disappear, because they're going to last longer than most other things. Anyway, that's me banging on. You're all journalists, I think. So does anybody want to ask me a question? Hello, sir.
What do you think about the Pledge Complaints Commission being a toothless watchdog?
Well, it's a good question, that, isn't it? It's a very good question. As I didn't find it that. I rang them almost every week. I would ring, every Saturday I'd ring the PCC and run through stories that I thought might be iffy, or we might have problems with. And if they said no, we wouldn't do it. I think the problem came really out of the fact of what we are to blame for is that we didn't quite realise that the PCC didn't have an investigative arm and needed one. And I think, and I said this in my first statement to Leveson, that what it really needed was a complete change in their ability to investigate complaints. I thought that if we had seen that and realised that, that could have made the huge difference. Because don't forget, phone hacking didn't happen because of the PCC being either toothless or not. People broke the law if they did it. We've all been arrested under the law as it stands, the criminal law. So it wouldn't have happened. And the truth is, when they tried to investigate it afterwards, they weren't capable of it. They weren't regulators in the sense of investigating. And I think that was the problem.
With all these journalists being arrested, is it fair to say that there's a kind of culture of criminality within tabloid journalism?
No, I don't believe that at all. I think there's a long, proud history of journalists sailing bloody close to the wind. And, you know, all right, I tell you what, let me ask you this question. Who thinks, it's particularly aimed at women this actually, who thinks that you should be able to pay police for information that would otherwise not get in to the public arena? He's thinking about it. Anybody else? No. No? Sorry, are you offering? No, he's adjusting his hair. Right, let me ask you this. What if that copper came to you and said, a famous person has been questioned about sexual offences, and the decision, wrongly I believe, has been taken not to take the investigation any further? What about then? Anybody think in that circumstance that paying a policeman would reveal a famous person had been questioned about serious criminal sexual offences? Do you think that's acceptable? Anybody?
Not acceptable. And the fact that the person's famous or not shouldn't have any bearing on it.
Okay, that's a valid that's a valid view. What if the guy said, this is a famous person, are any of you getting this yet? This is a famous person who is a friend of the royals and a friend of the Prime Minister and is regularly photographed with them and uses their fame and position to get access to young people, who plays at being a philanthropist, and that puts him in contact with vulnerable young people. And he wants £1,000 to give us the evidence that this happened. Anybody yet? Are you with me yet?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, good lad. Was that a hand up there? Hang on, more offers. Anybody else? Yeah, I've got another one.
You should have a civil duty just to hand over the information without any...
Do you? Well, I'm sure in an ideal world that would be perfect. So, all right then, anybody yet? Anybody yet? How about this then? He wants £1,000 and he will put us in touch with women who were vulnerable children in state accommodation in a approved school, young girls who he would, with the headmistress's permission, take out in his car and sexually abuse, and the women want to talk about it. The women are desperate to tell their stories, but the CPS, he says, I believe, because of his fame and power, are scared of this. I'm talking about Jimmy Savile. I'm talking about Jimmy Savile when he was alive. So, do any of you think, you may guess that I think this, do any of you think that if a police officer, for whatever reason, I've no idea, wanted £1,000, £500, £50,000, had gone to the press with enough information in 2009 when he, Sir Jimmy, was he a lord or just a sir? Sir Jimmy, and had been able to say, Prince Andrew's friend, Margaret Thatcher's bosom buddy, that this guy for 30 years has been sexually abusing young women and using his position to do so, and if we run the story, we will get a flood of other victims coming forward who after 30 years will finally get justice. They will finally be able to tell their story, because that, of course, is the crucial thing about Jimmy Savile, while he was still alive. My view, worth every penny. Sorry.
But would it have been that easy with Jimmy Savile? Because I think a lot of the problem with Jimmy Savile was that people were afraid to come out while he was alive. So the £1,000 possibly wouldn't have actually been the deciding factor in that story coming out anyway.
But we wouldn't have known.
But people did know.
No.
Everybody knew, surely.
Yes. But the difference is, for £1,000, I will get police documentation and CPS documentation and access to the women who would tell their, who want to tell their story.
Okay.
Slightly different.
Can you not just use your skills to find them?
How? Have you ever tried?
You're the trained to-
Yeah, I know. But that's the point, you see. Because I've been in exactly that position. I've been in exactly that position where I have been told that that well-known soccer star Freddie Barnes, or that well-known politician Jimmy Smith is out regularly in the nightclubs of London abusing his position. That's a pretty big pool to fish in without knowing what you're looking for. It doesn't work like that in truth. And if anything that I can disabuse you of is the idea that journalists just say, let's investigate him. He's tall and good looking and he's famous. Look at him, he's got a beard, he must be. Right, I'm going to investigate him. Where do you start? You know, I don't know him from Adam. You know, maybe you're his mate, maybe we come to you. But the problem is if we come to you, you might warn him. You know, it's not easy. It's an incredibly complicated, it's also incredibly expensive. Investigative journalism is incredibly expensive. Manpower and cash. So, do you all still think that I shouldn't have paid the copper £1,000? Anybody thinks, actually, on this one occasion, this very rare occasion, we might just go along with Mr. Wallis? That's me. Anybody? Oh, are you asking a question or are you just voting?
I agree with it because I personally feel that it's coming out after he died. He didn't have the right to defend himself, and I think that was wrong.
Perfectly right. Absolutely. Do you know the biggest thing that really strikes me about this is if you have the misfortune to have either ever been abused or know somebody who has ever been abused, the very worst thing about it is the fear that you won't be believed, you feel a victim, and these people target that. And the relief that most sex abuse victims get from finally thinking someone's taking them seriously is immense. And 465 people have now come out as a result of that story. And I just think it'd be far better if those 465 people had been able to get that sort of closure while he was still alive. However, I agree with this lady here. It was a bloody story. It would have been a bloody tough story to crack. Do you know why? Because in my time, people have said this, come to newspapers and said this. The problem you've got is he was really clever. He targeted damaged, vulnerable children from care homes and places like that. And they would say, who's going to believe me? I'm in here because I'm a hooligan. Because I've run away from home. I take drugs. Am I a reliable witness? And he'd have sat in that dock and he would have called Margaret Thatcher. Well, not now because she's not capable of it, but he would have called Prince Andrew, etc. Big, tough thing to take on. But at least there would have been a chance if that copper had thought to come forward. And now, of course, the good old CPS say, actually, we were wrong. We should have pursued it. There you go.
Just like to ask a question about protection of sources. What do you think about the April Casburn case and her being jailed over what amounted to a journalist giving up a source?
I was shocked by the April Casburn case on two levels. One, the idea that a newspaper could give somebody up like that. I don't care whether they broke the law or not, but the basic rule is you don't. You know, we're not police, is the truth. We are journalists and our job is to get stories out there. I was very shocked that the newspaper gave her up. Well, it's not the newspaper, to be honest. It was the MSC that has taken control of News International, Management Standards Committee. And secondly, I was very shocked by the verdict, frankly. It seemed to me to be one bloke's word against this lady's. You know, I know the journalist involved. It was the end of a 12-hour shift. It was 6 a.m. in the morning. Can he be 1,000% certain that she definitely asked for money 5 years ago? Or however, 3 years ago? I don't know. I was surprised by the verdict, and I don't know whether it said more, because don't forget it came after Plebgate, and that's caused a lot of ripples. I don't know whether or not it was about journalists, the low reputation of journalists, or the way we look at policemen. I don't know. Anybody else?
Last year we had Richard Pepiat coming to talk to us, who obviously famously walked out of the Daily Star. He actually tweeted us just before he came on to say, if you believe so strongly in free press, how do you account for the fact that all 175 Murdoch titles supported the Iraq invasion?
Let me say two things about this. A free press is about the ability of newspapers to investigate what they want. And if you restrict the free press for one title, the truth is you restrict the free press for them all. Now, let's just accept Mr. Pepiat's word that that happened. I simply don't know. Rupert Murdoch has never made any secret of his political views. The papers that he owns, just like Trinity Mirror, are a left-of-centre newspaper. You know it's going to vote for the Labour Party in the next election, don't you? The Guardian's never going to vote Tory, is it? Rupert Murdoch has a huge empire, of course, spread across a number of countries. Many of those newspapers that he talks about are little weekly newspapers in the outback of Australia, incidentally. So they're not significant in the sense that they're huge opinion formers. I don't believe that the editor of the Times was told by Rupert what his line should be, because the editor of the Times has gone against Murdoch on various general elections. But secondly, you know, some would say more power to his elbow. Richard Peppiatt is a fool. Richard Peppiatt is a guy who was a failure. Richard Peppiatt is a guy who was never able to hold down a job on a national newspaper, and so he decided to reinvent himself as this scourge of the press, apparently. He says he was told to make up stories. The people inside say that he would bring them stories and swear they were true. And as he'd worked there for a year, the fact that he was making the stories up was down to Richard Peppiatt. Richard Peppiatt was trying to use his last months. He'd just been turned down for a staff job, incidentally, this Guardian of the Free Press, on the Star. And he was using his time there to try to write a TV series about life in a tabloid newsroom. I read some of it, because it was found on his computer after he left. The editor of the Daily Star is a nice woman called Dawn Neeson. What he wrote about the female editor of his fictional tabloid newspaper was absolutely disgusting in his script. So Richard Peppiatt's always tweeting to me or about me. I don't actually usually bother because he's an idiot. On this rare occasion, I'll respond just this once.
Neil, sorry. I hate to interrupt. It's such an interesting and controversial moment. We are brilliant. We are running out of time. I'd just like to say, has anyone got any real crucial questions that you'd like to fire in the last minute or two here?
Yeah, we've got Brian Cathcart coming in, and I was just wondering if you had a message for him.
That we can use.
Tell him to tell Hacked Off to stop taking money from self-serving celebrities, and ask him to please stop trying to destroy 317 years of press freedom, which, incidentally, all of your forefathers, amongst them were people who died for this, against Nazi Germany, etc. There's another thing, incidentally, sorry about this. You know, Tim Luckhurst, he's got a great pamphlet out. I wish I could remember what it's called. It's a fascinating pamphlet. He was at a conference in which there were editors from Zimbabwe. And these editors, this editor in particular, who he names in that pamphlet, said to him, have you any idea what it will do for the unfree world if Britain, Great Britain, decides to have state regulation? Do you know how people like Mugabe will use that? So we rail against restrictions. Can you imagine when someone like Mugabe says, well, what's wrong with state regulation here? How about in Kenya, right? How about in Kenya, where they put people in jail for already for writing about gay people, or worse, for being gay, right? And those sorts of places justify it on the ground that the mother of parliaments, Great Britain, the bastion of world freedom, the place that led the fight against the Nazis, the place that led the fight against the Iron Curtain with America. We have state regulation. Have you any idea what message that sends out about us? Are we such a tired democracy that we are willing to lie down for that. Please don't do that. It's your future. I'm nearly dead. Look at me. I'm 62. It's your future.
Thanks very much, Neil. Okay.
Wants to
thanks
shut
very
me
much
up now.
for you guys as well. I hope you all agree that was an absolutely gripping talk. I'd like to thank Neil for coming up here early doors this morning.
Good on you,
from
fella.
London, coming up here, going to go pretty much straight back to London. Okay. If you'd like to show your appreciation.
Yeah. More.